let's create some geometry and discuss those differences. In Maya, I'm just going to create a polygon sphere, and I'm just going to open up the node editor here just to have a look at the node network that Maya makes for us. Now, the way Maya works is Maya has a shape node, and the shape node defines the objects that we're dealing with. In this case, our shape node is a mesh type. If I just create a NURBS sphere, you'll see the NURBS has its own shape node, being a NURBS surface type. And if I select one of the cameras, you'll see the camera has its own shape node here, a camera type. So the objects in Maya are defined by shape nodes. All of those shape nodes are underneath a transform node, which you can select in the outliner. You'll see here it says it's a transform type, and these are the ones in the network view that aren't connected. The reason they're not connected is because these shape nodes are effectively a child of the transform node, so that when you move a transform node, the shape node moves with it. Now we can see this parent-child relationship in the outliner here. By default it's turned off. If you go to the display menu and you turn on shapes, you'll see a little plus appears next to these transform nodes, and if you open them up, you'll see your shape node underneath as a child. So that when you move the transform, the child goes with it. So just a little recap. All objects in Maya are defined by a shape node, and all of those shape nodes are underneath the transform node that allows us to move these objects around the scene. And the outliner only really shows us the transforms. We can display all the nodes in the scene in Maya by going to display and turning off DAG objects only. Then we can see a whole bunch of nodes that go to create the scene in Maya, but that's not really the purpose of the outliner. It's more there to organize your scene and to be able to select things to move them around. Let's turn back on DAG objects only. We can do one or other two interesting things. These nodes here, these are some of the other support nodes that we have in Maya. In this particular case, this node is a polysphere node. And our shape node, just to remind you, only defines polygon objects. It doesn't actually define a sphere or draw it for us. That's the job of this node. This node defines our sphere, and it passes its result, or the plotted points, to the, if you have a look actually, to the in-mesh of the sphere shape, and it's the shape node here that then lays out and defines the polygons for us. And if you look, it's the same for the NURBS. This node here defines a NURBS sphere, and that's result is also passed into the NURBS shape node, which then draws a NURBS surface in the shape of a sphere for us. So we can manipulate this to some degree in Maya. So for example, if I type polycube, I can create a polycube node which defines a polycube. And I can take the output of this and then tell the shape node to draw a cube instead. As you see, the shape node knows nothing about the cube, it just takes the result of the node that's plugged in and draws that instead. These nodes are kind of called history nodes. The reason they're called history nodes in Maya is because you're not really committed. If I just turn on the wireframe on shaded here, you can see that I can change the subdivision and certain properties about my object after I made it with the menu. If I was to make it with the menu, let's go polygon cube, you'll see the menu options here are exactly the same as this node. Because essentially all the menu does is create the node for you, and then you can edit it afterwards without changing the menu in the first place. I think that's why they kind of call it history, because you can create the object and edit it afterwards. But you'll see there's a certain level of flexibility in here. Right, let's go over to Houdini and see how Houdini handles the same geometry. I'm just going to create a sphere in Houdini. Now I'm going to change the desktop here to the technical desktop because I want to see this tree view. It does look very similar to the outliner in Maya, but don't be fooled, it's certainly not the outliner. This is more like Windows Explorer. Houdini can be conceptually thought of as a file system, with the top level here being root, then we have these folders which are the different contexts, and then we have inside those folders we have the nodes, and inside those other folders we have other nodes. So much so that you can think of these nodes as folders, whereas you can double click them to go inside, and you can click the back arrow just like Windows to come out of the folder. Or you could just select it in the outliner if you wanted. So very similar to Maya, most of the time in Houdini you'll be working with surfaces, in Houdini's context called SOPs, or surface operators, and that means we're dealing with geometry. So all geometry will have a transform node, just like Maya, so we can move it around the scene. Very similar to Maya. Now, you'll see again in the tree view, as a child to that, or rather inside it, we have a sphere object. So let's go inside this transform node and have a look at this sphere object. So similar to Maya, there's a node here that defines a sphere, and this is drawing our polygon sphere. But the one thing you'll notice is, after the sphere node, there is no shape node. That's because we don't need a polygon shape node to define geometry in Houdini. That's because each node does things itself. So this node is creating spheres. It doesn't mind what type of geometry spheres it creates, it just creates spheres. So at the top here we could create a polygon sphere, or we can create a NURB sphere. It's up to us to define what kind of sphere this node creates. So it's a little bit more flexible than the setup in Maya, if you remember here, than having a node here that defines the shape, defines the object, the shape, and then plugs into a node that then draws the object for us. So in Houdini that just defines a sphere, and we can choose what geometry type we want. So if we want a different shape object, if I hit tab, we can just make one. So I have a cube object here which creates boxes, and again this just creates whatever box we want, whether it be a polygon or a NURBS. So already just the way it handles geometry inside it is a little bit more flexible. Conceptually you can kind of think of it as we're actually creating our own shape nodes here. Let's now have a look at a slightly more complicated example.